All right, we got our best GM close on today, so let's take a look at the Toronto Maple Leafs and how much time do you have. They're one of the most fascinating teams in the history of pro sports. Not only were they one of the most dominant teams of the original six era, it is perfectly contrast with them being one of the worst teams post-first expansion, having never made a Stanley Cup final since that Cup win in 1967, and they've been sort of wandering in the wilderness ever since. Now, it wasn't all bad. There were some highlights, the Darryl Sittler years, the Doug Gilmour years, where they were one blown call away from making the Stanley Cup final, that Leafs fans still insist to this day, had they gotten there, that they would have won. The Matt Sundin years were promising until they weren't. Couldn't make it out of the conference finals, but again, you were a consistent playoff contender. Then there was the Phil Kessel years, one of the most frustrating times in Leafs history. A classic case of thinking they were closer than they were and making bad trades and just kept digging themselves a deeper and deeper hole. However, that era did have a silver lining, because the Phil Kessel era, the Leafs finally bottomed out for good, and which led them to the first overall pick, where they drafted Auston Matthews first overall, and the year before they got Mitch Marner, and the year before they got William Nylander. A brand new core of Maple Leafs hockey was put in place. But unfortunately, we all know how that story has ended. It didn't matter what the Leafs did, because they took some big swings. They went out and got Frederik Andersen. They did the big swing on Jack Campbell after Frederik Andersen left. They had the big swing for Jake Muzzin. The big swing for Ryan O'Reilly. You signed the biggest fish ever in the free agency pool in John Tavares. You brought in veteran leadership at one point or another. Patrick Marleau, Joe Thornton, and Jason Spezza all walked through those doors. It didn't matter. The Leafs still found themselves unable to make it past the second round in the entirety of the Matthews era. And it all came to a head at this time last year, when Mitch Marner was essentially walking for nothing, and the only reason you got what you got in Nick Waugh was because Vegas was going to get caught with tampering allegations from the NHL. So now, begs the question, what do we do now? Because this year is very similar to what happened in 2016, where the Leafs bottomed out and ended up with the first overall pick. But this leads to some uncomfortable discussions that have to be had. Them going out and taking the big swing for Darren Raddysh, I admire John Chayka for his gusto to go for it, but as I've stated previously on this channel, I don't think Darren Raddysh is going to move the needle that much. And the cold, hard reality is you are without a first-round pick, your own, for 2027 and 2028. And you are not a Gavin McKenna away from contending. So, how were we going to rebuild the Leafs team when their cupboards are bare? Goaltending-wise, you seem to be in decent hands with Hildeby and Artur Akhomov coming up, but you still have the problem of Stolarz being injury-prone. On the defense, you have a very old defense, with the majority of them being on the wrong side of 30 and on expensive contracts. Coming up, your best piece is Ben Danford, Ben Danford is going to be a guy who plays a ton of NHL games, but he more than likely tops out as a bottom pair defenseman and a penalty killer. Not great for your best defensive prospect. On the forwards end, you have Easton Cowan, Tyler Hopkins, not much else. So let's get into it. How are we going to rebuild the Toronto Maple Leafs? Well, it's going to start with one important phone call, and it involves trading Auston Matthews. Now, I know, it is a tough pill to swallow because Leafs fans really, really like Auston Matthews, but you just have to accept the fact that he is not in this for the long haul, that he is not going to re-sign, and you are 2 years away from losing him for nothing. So you need to do what the Ottawa Senators did with their captain. They knew Brady Tkachuk was not re-signing, and they needed to get out ahead of it, and they needed to pull the trigger now. You need to do that right now with Auston Matthews. So what you do, you're going to call up the San Jose Sharks. Because realistically, with Matthews having a full no movement clause, he can sort of steer the bus where he would want to go. Now here's where the Sharks make sense. Auston Matthews was born in California, so he has the opportunity to go home. He has the opportunity to go to a nice weather team. The pressure will be instantly off, and they are a young team knocking on the door that just barely missed the playoffs this year. That's in a weak division that could conceivably be very much up for grabs this year. And coming back to the Leafs, you have the second overall pick in this year's draft, Michael Misa, Sam Dickinson, Josh Ravensbergen, and the 62nd overall pick in this year's draft. It's a big haul, but we're talking about a guy who has more than once scored 60 goals, won a Hart Trophy, won multiple Rockets, and to sweeten the deal just a touch for the Sharks, we are going to eat half of Auston Matthews' contract in this scenario to get the extra assets. The Leafs aren't going to be up against the cap for the next couple years, and again, Matthews' contract only has 2 years left on it anyways, giving the Sharks flexibility to re-sign Celebrini, Will Smith, Colin Graf, and still have them the chance to go out there and add in free agency. Now, instantly, after that is done, you don't just sit and take 1 and 2, you call the Vancouver Canucks. Instantly. Preferably before the deal with the Sharks has even been announced, you have Vancouver on the phone. And you offer them the chance to get Gavin McKenna, the close to hometown boy. I know he's from the Yukon, but closest to him. He played his junior hockey in BC. You have the chance to get Gavin McKenna, the superstar that Vancouver needs. And what comes back to the Leafs? You get pick number 3, pick 24, and pick 33. Now, you have picks 2 and 3 in the draft. Again, it's tempting to sit there and say, okay, we take whatever one of Stenberg or McKenna falls to us, and then we take the best defenseman in the draft. But we are not done. Now, we are operating under the assumption the Vancouver Canucks pull the trigger and take Gavin McKenna first overall. As soon as that happens, you call the St. Louis Blues. The St. Louis Blues have 4 picks in this year's draft, and I guarantee you they are not taking them all. The St. Louis Blues are the perfect mark to move up. And you already have Ivar Stenberg's brother Otto, so it makes an easy sell. You can reunite the brothers, and you move up, and you have your superstar piece to build around for St. Louis. Coming back to the Leafs, pick 11, pick 15, pick 16, and pick 73. So now, the Leafs have 5 first-round picks in this year's draft. Now, who are we taking? At number 3, you have your choice. You take whoever you have as the best defenseman on the board between Chase Reed, Carson Karels, or Keaton Vierhoff. I personally have it as Carson Karels, but you can go whatever which way you want because the Leafs need to build on defense. Their defense the last year has been slow, and the inability to move the puck. Any one of those 3 guys will help in that regard. Pick 11, you take Ethan Belschutz. A big, physical power forward, something the Leafs desperately need. Pick 15 and 16, you do it. You pull the trigger on the Ruck brothers. I'm telling you now, I'm higher on the Ruck brothers than a lot of people are. You put the Ruck brothers together, I guarantee you, you will see magic at the next level. As long as they're together, similar to the Sedins, you're going to get good results. Pick 24, Xavier Villeneuve. You need a fast, mobile defenseman. If he hits with the offensive ability that he has, he's Lane Hutson. If he hits, which, again, I think he will because I am higher on him than most. Pick 33, Ryan Rubrick. The guy who at this point last year was considered the 2nd overall pick in this year's draft. Now, he did not have a good year this year for Niagara in the OHL, granted, but the size is still there. The traits are still there. The tools are still there. So if you believe that this season was just a one-off, a write-off, an albatross, whatever you want to call it, you take Ryan Rubrick at 33, you've got yourself a steal. Pick 62, Charlie Morrison, a solid shutdown defensive defenseman. You throw him with Ben Danford, that's your bottom pair for the next 10 years. Pick 73, you go with Oliver's Murnikins. Again, solid defensive piece. Depth player, bottom 6 role. And again, if he hits, great. If not, it's pick 73. But again, depth player can be useful. Now, we are not done, because the Leafs still have several problems that need to be addressed. Mainly, you still don't have a first-round pick next year, and you have some guys you need to move, starting with Morgan Rielly. The second Darren Radish put pen to paper, Morgan Rielly's time in Toronto was sealed. So what are we going to do with Morgan Rielly? We are sending him to Utah. Utah is another team in the situation like the Sharks. They are a young team that made the only difference is they made the playoffs this year, and they think they're very close. So adding Morgan Rielly, you could see them putting him on their second pair, could be what they think they need to get them over the top. Now what's coming back to Toronto? Their first-round pick and their fourth-round pick for 2027. That's about what you value is for Morgan Rielly at this point. You get a first-round pick and, again, a mid-round pick. Nothing more than that just because of the terms still left on his contract. I think that is a fair return. And now we get into probably the most controversial one, and that's Matthew Knies. As we all know, Matthew Knies was going to be a Montreal Canadian at the deadline if the Leafs could have actually turned the trade in time. Now, this isn't a blanket rule, but usually when you try and trade a player and it falls through and everybody knows about it, that relationship is broken. You have to move that player, which I think the Leafs are going to do here. So who is he going to? You call up the Anaheim Ducks. Stop me if you've heard this before. A young team who thinks they're close. But in this case, you can swap problems, because it's well known that the Anaheim Ducks want to trade Mason McTavish. I think if Mason McTavish gets the proper ice time and put in a proper system, because he hasn't done well under Joel Quenneville, but in the right system, I think Mason McTavish is a cornerstone piece that you could really build around. I'm very high on Mason McTavish. So you get him plus Anaheim's first for 2027. So now, in the span of one night, you've gotten a future number 1 goalie in Josh Ravensbergen. You have brought in a number 1 pair defenseman in Sam Dickinson, who's only 20 years old. You brought in a number 1 center in Michael Misa, 19 years old. You have brought in Mason McTavish. You have gotten 3 first-round picks for 2027. You have 5 for 2026. Again, if you don't like who I took, great. You can rearrange that order however you would like. You have shed Morgan Rielly's contract. You've gotten yourself out of an awkward situation with Matthew Knies. And the biggest one, you got out in front of the Auston Matthews situation before it became the Mitch Marner situation all over again. Nobody loses. I think given the situation the Leafs are in, this is the best way to do it, because as I said from the start, you are not a Gavin McKenna away from contending. You need to fill out the cupboards, because Dubas and Treliving left the cupboards bare. This is how we restock them. But let me know what you think down in the comment section below. Did I do it right, or am I just insane? Like, comment, subscribe. We'll see you again real soon.